This video is on solving quadratics. Specifically, we're going to solve by square roots. So solving by square roots, when you're solving by square roots, there should always be two answers. Because you should end up with, no matter what, two solutions. They could either be two real rational solutions, two real irrational solutions, two imaginary solutions, or you could have one solution, but the thing is it technically happens twice still. So when we take the square root of a value, it's when we're solving only. You should have plus or minus with your answer. So if I ask, what squared gives me a positive 25, I would take the square root of 25. But positive 5 times positive 5 gives me 25, and negative 5 times negative 5 also gives me a positive 25. If I'm just taking the square root of a number, if I use my calculator just to get the square root of a number, square root of 25, I just get 5. But if the question is asking what squared gives you 25, you have to think of positive 5 squared and then negative 5 squared give you both the same answer. So that's why we have plus or minus, because it gives you the positive and the negative number that when you square it will give you 25. So whenever we have an equal sign when solving, when you have an equal sign and you end up taking the square root of something with across the equal sign, you have to make sure you put your plus or minus with that value that you get from the square root. So I'm going to do this first example. This first example it says solve the following. This first example actually looks very similar to vertex form or function notation, where you have your a, your h, and your k, and it is equal to 0. Equation should still be equal to 0. Do you notice that there is literally only one x in this problem? If there is only one x in this problem, you solve this just like a normal equation. You would do order of operations backwards. So in this case, we would do, instead of PEMDAS, we would do SADMEP. So PEMDAS backwards. That means we need to add and subtract away first, then multiply, divide, then the exponent, then parentheses. What that means is that this inside the parentheses here, we cannot touch until we get to the grouping symbols. The exponent, we cannot touch until we get to the e. So we have to make sure we get everything away from the parentheses, and then once we get away from the parentheses, we can start back over. So we do need to make sure that we have the correct directions. It says just to solve the following. On this one, it doesn't say to solve by factoring, solve by square roots, it just says to solve. And in this case, it would be the easiest to solve by square roots because this is just a basic equation now. So the first thing we want to do is add and subtract away first. We cannot touch inside the parentheses, so we're just going to completely ignore the parentheses for right now. We see a 2 times something, and then we see a minus 8. I can't do anything with the 2 because that's multiplication, but I can get rid of the 8 because that's already subtraction, so I can add it to the other side. So I'm going to add 8 to the other side. We'll have 2 parentheses, x plus 3 parentheses squared equals a positive 8. Now I've added and subtracted away from the parentheses, so I'm getting one step closer. Now I need to multiply or divide away from the parentheses. So this is a 2 times, so I want to get rid of that. So I'm going to do the inverse operation by dividing by 2 on both sides. Now I am technically dividing this entire part by 2, but again, I cannot touch the inside the parentheses. So even if something in here was divisible, we don't want to do anything with that. And I also did not distribute that because that's not possible because of that squared. We also don't want to put more onto the x if we're trying to solve for the x. We want to get everything away from the x, so don't put more on it. So when we divide by this 2, this outside 2 will go away. We will have parentheses x plus 3 parentheses squared is equal to a positive 4. So now we've multiplied or divided away. Now we can focus on the exponent. This one, the exponent is 2. the inverse of squaring is taking the square root. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. Now, when I took the square root when solving, so I'm going across the equal sign, I have to put a plus or minus with this answer. It's taking the square root of a value. This is an expression, this is a value. So this will stay as x plus 3 because the squared is going away, which is taking the parentheses with it. So we're going to have x plus 3 is equal to, again, right here, the square root of 4, because I'm taking the square root of a value, I have to put the plus or minus with this part right here. This will be plus or minus, and the square root of 4 is 2. Now, we've gotten rid of the parentheses, so because x is not alone yet, we have to actually start all the way back over and go again. So we have x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus 2. Now, there's two ways you can do this. You can do it at once, or you can separate them. I'm going to show you how you can do it at once, and then I'm going to show you how to separate them. So the first way, I'm going to put it up here, x plus 3 equals plus or minus 2. I'm going to rewrite the problem, or rewrite what we have at the end. So on this one, I could keep it all at once and just subtract the 3. But when I subtract the 3, I'm subtracting it from this front part. I will always put this in front of the plus or minus. So I have x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2. And then I can solve from there. Or, so I'm going to wait to solve. I'm going to show you the other way. Again, we have the x plus 3 equals plus or minus 2. So what I would do is I would set this up as two different answers because we have two different answers. I will set this up as x plus 3 equals a positive 2 and x plus 3 equals a negative 2. And then I would still solve. So I would still subtract the 3, and on this one I would still subtract the 3. But because I have it as two different expressions, now I can actually see that what numbers that these will become. So now to solve, I'm going to put them down here. X is equal to 2 minus 3 is negative 1. And then on this one, negative 2 minus 3 is a negative 5. So these are my two answers from this way. I could say the same thing up here. This is negative 3 plus 2, which is right here, negative 3 and then a positive 2. Negative 3 plus 2 is negative 1. And then negative 3 minus 2 is equal to a negative 5. So I get the same answers regardless of which way I do it. This one is separating them so you can see what the two different expressions will be, which is absolutely fine. Or if you keep it together, you want to keep whatever you move over last needs to go into the front before the plus or minus. Because you don't want to have plus or minus 3, because that's not true. This is a negative 3 plus or minus 2. Because you're doing negative 3 plus 2 and negative 3 minus 2. So either way will get you the same answer as long as you are careful on the actual math that you do.